All right. So let's kick it off, you guys. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We will probably have even more people joining. I'm Asaf. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Lusha. And it's great to have you with us today. In this webinar, we aim to provide you with the knowledge and the tools to better understanding of what you should take in consideration when buying or working with third-party data and vendors. And with us today are Judy Crimmins, our Senior Compliance Manager who acts as Lusha's Compliance Officer. She will be leading the conversation. Hi. Hey, Judy. Diana Berkowitz, who are lead legal counsel. And of course, we have Asaf. Hey, Diana. And we have Asaf Gilad, who is our head of legal compliance. He acts as Lusha's DPO and product counsel. So our agenda today, we have a little bit of intro by Asaf. We will learn about the best practices for selecting a data vendor. We will go over the considerations for granting access to your company's systems. And then we'll have a quick summary, and we'll provide you with a full checklist that you can take with you after this webinar. We will send you everything after this webinar, so don't worry, you don't have to screenshot it or do anything or write it down. You will have it in your email, and then we will have a time for answering your questions. So good luck and enjoy. Asaf, take us away.
Thank you, Asaf, and thank you all for joining us. We have taken the time to produce this webinar because we see a lot of challenges and mistakes that companies make when they're evaluating a data vendor. We, as privacy professionals from within the industry, would like to enrich you, to enrich your knowledge and teach you how to properly evaluate data vendors before any engagement. Before I get started, I want to explain the two types of engagement you may have with a data vendor. Okay, the first engagement is buying the contact information of relevant people you want to recruit or you want to do sales or marketing with, depends what your business is. Although you don't have to share any personal information with this vendor, you just search for people from certain industries or certain locations. Still, buying personal data of individuals from data broker that has not collected it properly may pose certain risks, okay? So we will talk about it in the first half of this webinar. The second type of engagement is when you connect your integration and actually conduct some kind of an enrichment or push to CRM process in which your employees share certain information with the data vendor, and the data vendor tries to enrich your company data with new and updated prospect data. Connecting systems and sharing data with a data broker is a different story, and we will discuss it on the second half of the webinar. Once we understand that, we can begin. So Judy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Got to say, I'm really looking forward to today's conversation and diving deep into some best practices around the safe and compliant way to purchase B2B prospect data. My esteemed friend Asaf provided an excellent framework and discussed the different types of engagements a company may have with a data vendor. So I think it might be helpful to go back to basics and discuss the bare necessities. So speaking of necessities, I think the biggest catalyst really for this conversation is that privacy laws, data protection regulations, industry best practice standards, the entire ecosystem really has expanded monumentally over the last few years. And it's essential to stay informed and proactive about protecting that most treasured asset of customers and individuals worldwide, which is of course personal data. And this is causing a lot of anxiety. What to do, where to start, who do I trust? So Asaf, that's where I'd like to kick off the conversation. How can a company trust a data vendor to provide them with the most compliant data? Where's a good place to start?
Oh, good question, Judy. It all starts and ends with the data vendor's privacy team. Since we all know the data collection processes require compliance with applicable laws worldwide, and these laws, as we know, change quite often. A dedicated privacy team is needed to stay on top of relevant development in the industry. Considering that competitors in the data sharing industry don't all have an in-house team of privacy professionals, it is essential to ask the data vendor whether they have an adequate hands-on in-house privacy team.
I mean, that seems like a no-brainer, really. How can I trust a data vendor, not a coffee vending machine vendor, a data vendor, to be compliant with privacy and data protection standards if they don't have a privacy team? That's, that's absolutely so important. So what does that look like, Asaf, in terms of size and speciality?
Good question. The size of the company the size of the company's team should be proportional to the number of customers it has. At minimum, a company that collects millions of records of personal data must have a designated data protection officer, what we call DPO, to guide and advise the company, and even more critically, a dedicated compliance manager to make sure that all processes and activities are in place. Its privacy team should ideally hold an IPP certifications, proving that those individuals can actually manage, analyze, and handle all of the vendors' data processing activities as part of their role. In short, the size of the team and its experience will provide you with an insight into the data vendor's approach to compliance.
Very important. Asaf, you mentioned the IAPP, which, for the benefit of those who don't know, is the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Now, according to, I believe it was 2021, I might be mistaken, according to a 2021 survey, organizations with a dedicated privacy team experienced 50% fewer data breaches. Now, let that sink in. 50% fewer breaches. And I think what this does, it highlights the value of having experienced and knowledgeable privacy professionals on board. So speaking of experienced and knowledgeable, Diana, what else do you think should be fundamental best practice for securing a compliant vendor? What about compliance with the laws?
I mean, absolutely. That's a critical aspect, and finding a compliant vendor is why we're all here in this webinar, find best practices for that. So to secure a compliant vendor, it's absolutely crucial to conduct a thorough due diligence on the vendor's data protection and collection practices and security measures. This would include reviewing their privacy policies, assessing their data handling procedures, and verifying their certifications and third-party audits. A vendor must comply with the relevant privacy laws that they're subject to, for example, GDPR, CCPA. I think we all know what those are. But critically, they must be able to demonstrate this compliance. It's not enough to just say that they're compliant. So my recommendation is to make sure that you ask a data vendor if it can provide you with the representations and warranties to give you the actual assurance that it can provide you with the data it is selling in compliance with laws and regulations.
That makes perfect sense. Thanks, Diana. Can you give us an example of such a representation?
For sure. A great example would be that the data vendor states that it possesses all necessary authority and permissions to provide customers with access to the data. Lusha actually states this in section 7.4 of its master subscription agreement, MSA, if you're looking for a good reference point. In terms of the DPA, data protection agreement, other than the obvious allocation of liability between the parties, it's really important to ensure that the data vendor will represent and warrant its compliance with GDPR, if applicable.
Okay, so we've mentioned GDPR, and I think that's always the sort of beast and Goliath of privacy laws, isn't it? It's quite funny. As a compliance officer, I talk to a lot of customers from all around the world, India, Australia, Brazil, Dubai. Now, they don't ask, are you compliant with the UAE data protection law or the LGPD in Brazil? All they want to know about is GDPR, which is understandable, given its pervasiveness and extraterritorial reach. But I want to talk about the United States. Asaf, are there any requirements or reps and warranties needed for the US specifically?
Certainly. Well, certain states in the US require that data vendors register as data brokers. And those data brokers need to comply with certain state legislation. So You must request that your data provider, if he provides you with US data, will represent and warrant that he will confirm with the all the data broker registration and requirements. Where at least in California there is a registration procedure, New Jersey, Oregon, Texas, Vermont, and it keeps adding up. So you must ensure that. Also, as the same as Diana said regarding GDPR, the data broker that claims to be compliant with CCPA, you should ask them to show you their certificate from a third-party auditor. We at Lusha, we use Trustworthy as an auditor. They provide an attestation that they can be shared with our customers looking for a proof of CCPA compliance. Okay, so always ask them, give us some kind of a representation and warrant that you do actually comply with GDPR and CCPA.
And that's absolutely critical. Thank you. I think what it is, one of the strongest, most impressive assurances a company can provide in terms of its compliance is evidence of third-party audits and certifications. It's about instilling trust among customers and demonstrating that a vendor meets the required standards of data protection. So, Asaf, back to you. In terms of certifications, what should a company be looking at?
Well, if we take GDPR as an example, an audit by an impartial third-party European auditor, okay, that provides an objective assessment of the data vendor's compliance with the European data protection regulation, that's something that you should ask. It may come to you as a surprise, but many data vendors have not undergone such an assessment and merely claim to be compliant.
So in other words, they make a self-declaration of conformity, which doesn't really carry the same weight, does it?
No, it doesn't, and it shouldn't. Anyone can self-declare they are GDPR or LGDP or CCPA compliant. And that's why they do. No company will declare that they are not compliant, of course. Companies should be aware of that. By all means, ask your data vendor to provide you with a certificate that proves their compliance, such as e-privacy seal that we use in Lusha. Okay, that's a European certified state auditor. And if a data broker cannot provide you with an impartial third-party audit, I urge you to seek further clarification regarding their compliance claims.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the laws and assurances of compliance. We sort of introduced that topic. I'd like to talk a little bit about the practical application of the laws and the sort of thing a vendor should be able to demonstrate. So, Asaf, I want to ask you about data collection notices. That's always a very hot topic, isn't it? So most jurisdictions, they've historically allowed businesses to collect personal data without express consent. But certainly since GDPR and CCPA came into effect, there's now an obligation to inform the data subject, inform the consumer, the individual, about the collection and use of their personal data upon collection. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, indeed. Article 14 of the GDPR is the most obvious example. It focuses on the principles of transparency in the data collection and requires data brokers to notify data subjects that their data is being collected, processed, and sold. It is important to ensure that all data subjects identified as residents of a European Economic Area or California residents have been properly notified prior to the sale of data. You can also push the data vendor to provide you with representation and warranties that they have met this requirement. I have seen some platforms allow customers the ability to decide whether or not to display European prospect with or without a notice. This generally should sound the alarm because it means that the data broker is selling data without any notice.
Gosh, I mean, that's actually shocking about platforms allowing end users to decide whether or not to display European prospects without notice. I mean, that's not only is that a major red sign, but I think in some cases it might also leave a company vulnerable to investigation and sanction. So what these notifications actually do is facilitate the robust and seamless exercise of data subject rights. Another important notice concerns the obligation of a data vendor to remove or rectify personal data upon request. And not only that, but to also notify their customers. So notify the customers that have purchased that data. This is Article 19 GDPR. Asaf, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, for sure. So upon data decision to opt out, Article 19 of the GDPR requires that the data vendor will inform any recipient of the data about the opt-out request, okay? So companies should verify that their data vendor of choice will proactively notify their organization if the purchase prospect requested an opt-out.
I mean,
Okay.
presumably all data vendors should be able to comply with that, no?
Well, Judy, you'd think so, but many data vendors don't actually have the technical infrastructure to comply with this and provide the service.
I see.
And some actually only do it if you connect to their API, which actually may in itself introduce other privacy issues.
Precisely, yes.
First, you'd need to make sure that you'll get these types of notices even when you do not connect your systems.
Okay.
Secondly, you should be aware that even if you do connect your systems, some data vendors will remove purchase contacts from your internal system if the contact chooses to opt out, often without your control. And while this may sound good, right, in theory, this actually may implicate you, since it may imply that there's no independent controller relationship, which may raise your legal exposure. So you'll want to make sure that you are in control of removing the contact, since you may have already established a legal basis to continue processing the data and engage with the data subject.
Okay. All right. Enough about the law. We don't want everyone falling asleep. I want to delve deeper into standards. Now, while compliance with the law is obligatory, we know compliance with standards is not. And yet, in spite of that, we're seeing a growing trend over the last few years of more and more data vendors certifying against ISO 27701, specifically that's the standard for privacy information management. So what do you think the reason is?
The reason, first of all, I want to say that compliance with these standards is voluntary, okay? Lusha is proud to be the first company in the industry to be ISO 27701 certified, setting the privacy standards higher than the entire industry, okay?
Yeah.
I'm also glad that some data brokers in the industry followed us and went the extra mile to get certified. As a company that processes personal data worldwide, we are asked to provide reps and warranties that we are compliant worldwide. So since it's almost impossible to hire a third-party auditor for each country in the world, we decided to go through this new international standard of ISO, which includes all the main requirements of all privacy laws. By the way, you should know that this ISO 27701 was recognized by the French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, as the closest validation you can find today to make sure that you are GDPR compliant. And today, the international privacy standard is actually a validation for companies' internal processes to be compliant worldwide. However, and this is really important, not all ISO 27701 certification are equal. When you check if the vendor is 27701 certified, you must ensure it is also accredited by an international body.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it gives confidence when a certification body is accredited. It means that there is a focus on impartiality, a focus on independence, and that, of course, brings us back to the magic word, trust. But let's explain, for the benefit of our listeners, what does an accredited certification actually mean?
Well, many agencies will be able to get paid for audit and issue certifications, but to ensure both parties, the auditor and the data vendor, are satisfied, the audit may not be thorough enough. Okay, so accreditation is an additional review of the audit that was done by a recognized international body for reliability. The international body is not paid by the data vendor, and it ensures that the initial audit meets the international standards. So this audit is actually much more thorough. Accreditation actually demonstrates that the company privacy and security processes have been verified and are in place. And you should know that, for example, insurance companies may not insure companies without accreditation. Okay, so make sure you ask your data vendor for the ISO 27701 accreditation. Okay.
That's actually that's actually quite critical. I think I just want to repeat that because it's so important for the benefit of our listeners. Some insurance companies may not insure companies without ISO accreditation. So make sure you look out for that. Okay, so we've talked about some best practices for acquiring a data vendor in terms of demonstrating compliance with privacy laws. Now, I want to touch on a more technical legal aspect of the process and talk about what a company can do pre-signature to safeguard their rights. So in other words, I'm a company, I'm new, I've selected a data vendor for my marketing or sales or fraud prevention team, and I'm about to enter into a relationship. It's important to clarify each party's rights and obligations. So how are these determined, Diana?
So this one's a little bit more complicated than a regular vendor that you share data with, right? So like other vendors, you should always ensure that your employee data and any data you share with a data vendor remain properly protected. You will, of course, set out to establish the requisite roles and responsibilities for each party. For example, in respect of the data you share with the vendor, you want to assign a processor to controller DPA, okay? Regarding the data transferred by the data vendor to you, it's important that each party be an independent controller. You'll want to ensure that your company is not a processor or joint controller with the data vendor, since this could lead to your company taking on liability for the data vendor's actions.
Correct. Yeah.
Other aspects to consider include the allocation of responsibility concerning these relationships, particularly regarding data subject rights, data security measures, sub-processes, data deletion and retention, audit rights, and data breach notifications. It's quite a mouthful, but these are really important things to consider.
They are all absolutely critical. I completely agree with you, Diana. I want to ask you about another hot topic for individuals, and that's the do not call DNC registers, which are, so DNC registers, just to clarify, they're the central opt-out registers where individuals can register their wish not to receive unsolicited sales and marketing calls. So what should companies be asking a data vendor specifically about DNCs, Diana?
So it's important to know if the vendor is an official cleaner of a DNC.
Okay.
Many data vendors are not actually official cleaners. They therefore have no obligation to scrub their data in a timely manner or at all. We recommend onboarding a vendor that does scrub against DNC lists. For example, the TPS, UK's official DNC register for landlines, mobile numbers, and the CTPS, which is for corporate phone numbers, since this can help your company mitigate litigation risks. Also, make sure that the data vendor is consistently refreshing the data and allows you to remove personal data that is on this DNC list.
Okay. What are the implications of a potential complaint or violation?
Obviously, this is something everyone wants to avoid. Companies can face substantial fines for violating DNC regulations. For instance, in the US, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, can impose fines for up to, wait for it, $44,000 per call.
44,000? It's incredible. Yes. Gosh.
Violations can obviously also lead to legal actions, including lawsuits from consumers and regulatory bodies alike. And this obviously can result in further financial penalties and legal costs. Not to mention the obvious potential damage to the company's reputation, which could, again, leading back to trust, could lead to a loss of trust and potential business.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, another hot topic that I want to ask you about now, before I forget. What about the data life cycle, Diana? What happens to the data once the contractual relationship has ended?
Simply put, individuals own their data, not the companies that are selling it. Okay. That's why even after the agreement has been terminated, Lusha allows its customers to continue using the data that they have purchased. In contrast to this, some companies even go so far as to take legal action against their customers for continuing to use the data post-contract termination. You can ask your data vendors to give you contractual assurances that they won't prevent you from using the data that you've purchased after the contract has terminated.
It's terminated, yeah. Asaf, any input?
It's if you talk about something that you need to ask your data vendor, it's really important. Speaking with him and even send him a questionnaire, vendor questionnaire, asking the data vendor for any kind of litigation he has in regards with privacy or customers lawsuits. I would do even a quick Google check or Lexis or Westlaw research for past court decision. This is a great opportunity to understand the vendor's processes and compliance standing, and don't be afraid to ask it, because you will be amazed what you might find.
I can imagine, yes. So that's really key. I think that's one of the things that we want to convey here, with sort of utmost confidence. Don't be concerned or don't worry about asking the data vendor these questions. Absolutely. Okay, I'd like to dive a little deeper into the more technical issues and indeed the legal safeguards that can be implemented to address concerns around connecting your systems to a vendor platform. So what do we mean by that? So for example, connecting via CRM, Gmail, Outlook, or also sharing company data via tools such as API. There are, of course, major considerations that we need to be taking into account in regard to the data shared with a vendor. Okay, so this is really about granting data vendors with access to company systems. So legal safeguards, let's kick off with that. We talked in some length a little earlier about DPAs, data processing agreements, which are absolutely essential. And Asaf, presumably you also need, correct me if I'm mistaken, but you need a DPA to hire a third party to process your data. So for example, through web analytics or cloud storage or any other tools that facilitate the delivery of services.
Exactly. So data processing agreements are essential in setting out the terms, roles, and responsibilities of all parties, ensuring that the data you share with the data vendor is protected. For example, a robust DPA will define your company as the controller of the data and the data vendor as a processor. We're talking about the data that your company is sharing with the data vendor, okay? Yeah. It's also should outline the safeguards the data vendor must provide you with to protect your data. Not all players in the data brokerage industry play by the rules. You should know that. And some of them use any kind of data they get their hands on to add to their database, including their own customer data. You must ask if all data that you share with such data vendor will be processed by the vendor as a processor and will not be shared or sold to third parties. Okay?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Diana, as a legal counsel responsible for drafting and negotiating these agreements, these DPAs, do you have any tips for a company when reading through the engagement contract?
It might sound obvious, Judy, but read the fine print of the agreement that you're signing.
Yeah,
I said it. Some data vendors will try to use the data you share with them and add it to their own database. And they hide this in the fine print. So we really strongly urge you to verify this and get contractual assurances that your data, the data your company discloses to the data vendor, won't be shared or sold to third parties. And we recommend that this is stated in the DPA as well as the main contract. And if you're looking for wording to request from the data vendor, you can refer to Lusha's MSA section 6.6.
And I must say that this is not only something that you want to limit your vendor contractually. This is a big red sign, okay? Because if a data vendor is compliant with major privacy laws, it must represent and warrant that the data accessed from your company system will be used solely for the agreed upon service, like enrichment, and that's it. That's it. No other secondary use, okay? To confirm that, you can request that the data vendor provide you with some kind of evidence about it. For example, ISO 31700, it's the new privacy by design certification. And this ISO proves that the data vendor's adherence to privacy by design principles and will not use customers' data for secondary purposes. Okay?
What we're really talking about here again, I think, is assurances. The value of assurance is a positive declaration intended to inspire confidence. That's what these certifications do. The certifications, these attestations, these validations. Demonstrating accountability with audits is a valid strategy to ensure privacy assurance.
Yes, and also security assurance. For
Certainly.
example, SOC 2 and ISO 27001 serve as evidence that the data vendor has implemented strong security measures to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data that they handle. You can request that the data vendor provide you with copies of these security certifications to guarantee the security of your data during processing. Requesting that the data vendor include a commitment to complying with these measures and maintaining these certifications is also highly recommended.
Okay, I want to talk about data localization. Okay, so I get a lot of questions from customers about where Lusha stores its data, and some of them, in fact, more and more customers seem to prefer data storage in Europe. Why is that?
Well, Judy, certain customers prefer their customer data to be stored in Europe due to EU stringent data protection laws. Within the EU, customers have a greater control over their data. It minimizes the privacy risks such as unauthorized access, and the likelihood of data breach is reduced due to fewer transfers to less compliant countries. Okay.
And of course, information is transferred. If information is transferred out of the EU, it can only get transferred to countries or organizations that have equal privacy considerations.
Correct.
So, what would you advise to our listeners in this case?
Well, ensure you are mitigating your company's risk by requesting that your company's data be stored within the EU, and the sub-processors of your data vendor will process your company data in the EU as well. You will be able to safeguard your company data, ensure compliance with regulations, and mitigate risks associated with granting access to company systems. Okay?
Indeed. Okay, so I think we've had a very inspiring and interesting deep dive into best practices and considerations, which I hope our listeners found refreshing in terms of new knowledge and perhaps even the consolidation of things they've already known. Asaf, I'd like to ask you one last question before we dive into a summary. Are there any other risks specifically that a company should consider before implementing a solution and connecting its systems to a data vendor platform?
We cannot have a webinar this day without mentioning AI, of course. So some companies, some companies will brag about adopting Copilot and other AI tools, but it is important to get reps and warranties that your company data will not be trained on by public open AI. Okay, you don't want to find your company data in some answers of an AI bot somewhere on the web. Okay, make sure that your contract contains AI reps and warranties on this issue. Okay, so I think we covered it all. Okay, and we covered a lot of topics, but we would like to give you a practical tool to review and refer back to when evaluating things. Okay, so we will send you this presentation at the end of this webinar. In it, you will find a checklist that will assist you in comparing and evaluating different data vendors. For your convenience, we already filled out Lusha's compliance standing, but you need to make sure to use it the next time you vet a data vendor. Without further ado, okay, we will now move to the Q&A. Saf, any questions?
Great, you guys. It was amazing and really interesting. And now it's the time to answer some questions we have from our audience that arrived today. So our first question from the beginning came from Kyle, who asked, can you please cover the application of the Spam Act in Australia and how Lusha stays compliant for Oceania prospecting?
Okay, allow me. So we have to differentiate between privacy laws and marketing laws. Okay, so the spam laws is how you deal with your data and how you use it. So because we are independent controller, which Diana said so in the beginning, you don't want to sit on the bench in front of a judge with your data vendor for the data vendor wrongdoing. And so do we. We don't want to sit on the bench for the wrongdoings of the customer. So each one is independent controller. We don't control how you use marketing, use the data for marketing. Okay, each country has its own laws, marketing laws, and you should know how to do it if you operate in this region. Okay, we cannot, of course, we cannot give you legal advice what to do and how to act in different jurisdictions. It's not our goal. We do have, by the way, in Lusha, and I think we should add it to the email, a privacy map, marketing laws map that is a good resource, and you don't need to go and check for each jurisdiction. You can find in the map all the laws that you need to follow and guide your salespeople. Okay.
That's a very good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you, Asaf. So our next question is, in case of Lusha customer who buy personal users' contact details for their business marketing, if personal user asks for the source of data, can it be disclosed that the contact details were obtained from Lusha?
Yes, of course. This is the law, and we don't write in the contract you should disobey the law. Okay, if the law requires you to do so, it's written in our master agreement that you should disclose the fact that you purchased it from Lusha.
Thank you, Asaf. Another question we have is, Lusha, while acting as a data broker, is performing role of data controller or data processor?
Diana?
So I guess, as Asaf has already mentioned and alluded to in various ways, Lusha, or a data broker, acts as an independent controller when it's transferring the information to a customer.
But we also sign as a processor when the customer provide us data to enrich, then we act as a processor. And that's the core essence that some data vendors don't put the effort on, and then they think that all of the data they shared is their data. So you must know that your data as a customer should be treated by the data vendor as a processor, and only act to process your data on your behalf. Okay, and not for his own benefit.
Thank you, Asaf. We have quite a long answer, so bear with me. Data collection process of Lusha involves scan of business social network profiles, i.e. when an end user uses Lusha browser extension while using LinkedIn, Lusha reads the minimum data presented on the LinkedIn profile pages that the end user is browsing for providing the service, like name, position, company, contact details if public. Assuming one of LinkedIn profile person visit Lusha website and register for data deletion. If another end user uses Lusha browser extension and visits same LinkedIn profile, will Lusha collect personal data again? I hope that you understood the question.
I hope so as well. So when our add-on, okay, the browser add-on reads the data, okay, we read the data because we need to know, we want to enrich this and this person, okay, so we enrich it, we transfer it to our search and come back with a result, okay, and it's right away. So if two people 2 minutes apart will visit the same LinkedIn profile, they may get different response because our data is all the time, in every second is updated. Okay, so in the first minute, maybe we will go and search and find one result, and the second one will find different result. So it can be different results. Okay, we don't populate the data and give it to another one, because then it's using the customer data. It's not, we are not reading LinkedIn data like that. Okay.
Thank you, Asaf. I think we have one last question, unless someone wants to submit in the few minutes we have. A lot of data protection law rely on consent. When we reach out to prospects using contacts procured through Lusha, do we need to take a consent or can rely on consent that Lusha had?
That's a good question, and that's bring me again to the privacy and marketing laws. So Lusha, of course, based its legal basis on legitimate interest. Okay, we are collecting publicly available information. People, when they open a LinkedIn page or they put their name and title on the law firm website, they want to know, they want to get approach for business offers. And once they put it publicly, they have expectation, and this is the legitimate interest we based on. Okay, so this is why we process data. That's why we can bring you the data as well. Okay, and you base it on that as well for processing the data in your system. Now, for conducting a marketing activities, okay, and I'm not sure that when we talk about marketing activities, we have to assume that in some countries, marketing is only B2C, so it doesn't fall into the B2B. In some jurisdiction, you don't need consent, okay, because you're doing a B2B. It's not even under spam. It doesn't fall into the DNC even. It depends on the jurisdiction that you need to do. But mainly in most jurisdictions, B2B calls or B2B emails to an email of your workplace doesn't fall into the marketing, proper marketing that we know of and that require consent.
Thank you, Asaf.
The best way is to use our resource map. And we care about our customers. That's why we build this map. We want to assure that you have a nice and fast way to address those questions from your sales team.
Thank you, Asaf. We have another question from Alexandra. She's asking, can you please explain why you decide you are a processor when data is shared for data enrichment purposes?
Why?
Can you please explain?
I can take this one, Asaf, pitch in if you would like.
I'm trying still to absorb the question.
Yeah, we've been speaking a lot about processors, controllers, independent controllers. You know, there's a lot going on. So I think what's important to understand is that when you send us data to enrich, there's a flow of data from your systems to Lusha or a data vendor. And in that flow, we become the processor. We as the data vendor become the processor of the data. It's momentary, but we become the processor. And that information is stored in a separate and distinct database, or held there rather, while it's being enriched, and it does not form part of our platform database, which some data providers do. Then once we enrich the data, that flow of data is independent controller to independent controller. So it's all very quick, these two different flows of data, but it's really important to know that your data vendor, when you're sending them your CRM data to enrich, that it's not just going to their database, and that they're obligated as a processor in that respect and will not sell that data. Hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Diana. We have another question. Does Lusha only collect publicly available information, or do you also collect from non-public sources?
And we collect from 3 or 4 main resources. One is publicly available information, for sure, everything that is public on the web. Okay. The second one, we have a community of our customers, non-paying customers. Okay, we allow you to join Lusha and use its features, but instead of paying us money, you can be a free user and give us permission to read your data. So we connect your email, and then we read only the signature blocks and your metadata. So we take the business information from there. The other solution we use, actually all the data broker industry use the same technique, is email guessing. Okay, once we know the certain company email procedure, for example, in Lusha, my email is asaf.g, so I can assume that Diana email is Diana dot the last name, and then we can build and validate email, so it's email guessing. And the last one is data brokers. Okay, we We buy data from data brokers, and we make sure that they follow the regulation as well. We don't sign with any data broker that is not either got consent or either got some kind of rep and warranties that he collected it from publicly available information. So those are the 4 types of sources that we use.
Thank you, Asaf. And our community is very big, right? And it's a really great source that we have and very unique to Lusha. And obviously, everything is being approved by the user proactively. So this is really great and unique. I think we have answered all the questions. And I think we had quite a blast of a webinar and really interesting. So I would like to thank you all. First of all, everybody who joined today, thank you for joining. And as we said, we will be sending you a follow-up email with this presentation and few links that will be very useful for you. I would like to thank Asaf, Judy, Diana. Thank you all for this great information. And until next time, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.